Chaina's Torment. Chapter 24. From inside the Ataria chasm, Veza watched the conflict between Lawan and Loquatus escalate towards civil war. Since the water portals only worked from surface to surface, the two sides were forced to grind out a victory the old-fashioned way, face to face on the battlefield. Lawan's first move was to send an armed force large enough to blockade the gorge, but not to storm it. Loquatus mocked her for not coming in person and concentrated all of his mercenaries and undersea monsters at Lawan's end of the chasm. There were frequent skirmishes as the Imperials tried to press in, and the mercenaries laboured to keep them out. The two forces continued to grow stronger and stronger as the days wore on. Veza had never witnessed a full-scale military engagement before, though she had heard vivid stories from her grandfather describing Abashan's predecessor's rise to power. Where her grandfather described noble duels and magnificent noble beasts, Veza saw ambush and sniper attacks alongside the hideous spectacles of razor rays tearing into leviathans. Massive Orcan warriors surged out of the chasm to engage the Empress's troops, and though each was driven back, each took its toll on the Imperial Guard with their massive fists and powerful jaws. Loquatus's mercenaries were unwilling to fight hand to hand. They preferred to pounce from the shadows in overwhelming numbers, or to not leave the safety of the chasm. The ship-to-ship combat was even worse. Giant, graceful deep-sea creatures roaring and tearing at each other like wild dogs. Lawan's troops took heavy losses to their razor rays until they began using a school of electric eels that cooked the giant fish in mid-battle. Huge, paddle-footed beasts with long necks grabbed guards like fruit from a tree, and were in turn choked by Sagasum blasts or poisoned by lances coated in lethal pufferfish extract. When she wasn't watching the endless stream of carnage and patrol ships, Veza spent her time sifting through the survey data she'd collected. She couldn't reconcile what she'd seen in the chasm with what she reviewed. The data indicated gemstone deposits, precious ores and metals, and a freshwater underground river that could easily be tapped for drinking water. Loquatus was delighted, and the more value she discovered, the more troops he brought in to hold it. Veza also had duties assigned to her by Loquatus. With the ambassador's armed guards by her side, Veza inspected the canyon walls for stability. Under their careful watch, she enchanted a series of blue crystals and affixed them to the walls along the entire length of the chasm. These crystals could relay magical impulses to one another. Veza used them to transmit data up and down the length of the flood zone. She also knew Loquatus intended to use the crystal arrays as a weapon. If he were forced to quit the chasm, he would send a signal to the crystals that would bring the walls crashing down, and whoever was inside would be crushed. He smiled when he told Veza his plans, but he made it clear he did not fully trust her yet. He made sure that she was not allowed to alter the spell that powered the stones, so that they could only transmit magical impulses, and only within the chasm. If anyone but Loquatus tried to use them in any other way, they would shatter. Finally, Lawan herself arrived at the head of another flotilla of ships and leviathans. Loquatus had sent Burke to collect Veza and politely forced her to sit and watch the show. Beyond the front, safe from the fighting, sat Lawan's private yacht, a smaller, slower version of her transport leviathan. Loquatus made sure the Empress was indeed on board, and that Veza had an excellent view before he rolled out his surprise. The long, familiar shape of Lawan's transport leviathan streaked out of the chasm and ploughed through her forces on a direct line of attack for the Empress. Loquatus had not, in fact, slaughtered the Empress's transport vessel. He had commandeered it and sent it into battle against her. Veza almost wept when the Empress's troops were forced to strike the Leviathan down with spell blasts and giant ballista bolts. Hours after the destruction of her transport, Lawan unleashed a squadron of heavily armed cephalids. Just as they came into range of the mercenaries' weapons, the squadron vanished from sight. The invisible squadron did a lot of damage to their unsuspecting foes before the enchantment wore off, and they were only captured and killed when they tried to storm Loquatus's command ship. After the initial exchange of hostility, the front stabilized just outside the chasm, and each side settled in for a long siege. Not in the strictest sense of the word, Veza knew, because either side could abandon the battle at any time they pleased by simply turning around and swimming away. Veza had been close enough to both Loquatus and Lawan to know that neither of them were going to do that. The entire Empire was watching this conflict, and whoever came out victorious would have enough political and popular support to claim the Imperial throne. Meanwhile, Veza continued to watch and research. Loquatus stayed safe in his canyon, and Lawan stayed safe in her luxury vessel, while the troops tore each other to bits at the mouth of the canyon. Kamal strapped on his broadsword and took a few tentative steps across his tiny room. He was nowhere near full recovery, but he could walk. If he could walk, he could fight. Kamal was sensitive to the Mirari, and he could feel the powerful forces gathering around it. He was uncertain, but unafraid. Unknown challenges were a barbarian's stock in trade, after all, and the promise of a good contest was more than enough incentive for Kamal to meet this one. Kamal left the public house and joined the crowds of people heading to the Cabal City pits. Cabal City's anniversary games drew more spectators and more combatants than any event ever before. Everyone in and around the city either wanted to take a shot at the Mirari or wanted to watch others do so. From his vantage point high above the arena floor, Chainer watched the crowds and the fighters buzz and vibrate like a huge hive of wasps. Chainer looked around at the former First private box. It was luxurious, round, floating platform, with all the amenities visiting dignitaries expected. The First often watched important games from here, or rather watched the crowd watching the games. Among the First's finery, with the Mirari safely hidden in his chambers, Chainer understood what Skellum meant when he spoke of the good things in life. Chainer leaned over the side of the platform with a dizzy grin on his face. All of the contestants had been assembled in the main pit below, and it was literally full of hundreds of humans and monsters crammed together under Chainer's box. Down there they were waiting. Up here he simply was, and would be until he decided to start the action. "Ladies and gentlemen and others!" The announcer's voice was much louder up here than it was at ground level. "Welcome to the Mirari Games!" A small cheer went up through the crowd. "Today we have something truly unique in store for you. The largest collection of fighters in the world has gathered for the right to claim the Mirari. The Sphere of Wonder. There will be only one winner. There..." A bolt of lightning shot up from the floor into the magical apparatus that amplified the announcer's voice, and his introduction sputtered and choked. Intrigued, Chainer peered more closely at the tall figure standing alone at the center of the only clear space on the arena floor. "Murderer!" the figure cried, his voice echoing like a gong. "Destroyer of the innocent! The Order is here for retribution!" "I know, Justiciar," Chainer said softly. "I've been counting on it." Justiciar Gobal's hood and robe had been burned off by his initial blast, and he stood sparking and crackling in his polished armor. Beside him, 3 more robed figures cast off their outer garments to reveal terrible white-winged angels armed with flaming swords. All around the arena, other fighters began to unsheathe their weapons. Others who were wiser or perhaps more cowardly quickly tried to exit the arena. "Your attack on our hospital killed more than healers and wounded soldiers. It killed the angels. In their place, angels of retribution have arisen. Your end comes now, Kabbalist." The Justicar pointed his hand at Chainer, and the angels took wing. The Justicar sent another bolt of lightning up towards Chainer's platform. The platform was thoroughly warded against all types of attack, however, and the Justicar's bolt faded into nothingness before it ever touched Chainer. "Oh no," Chainer said dramatically. "Angels and Justicars? The Order has come for me! Whatever shall I do?" He focused on the Mirari back in his chamber, concentrated, and every door in the huge arena slammed shut and melted into the wall around it. His eyes were long gone, and his voice boomed out louder than the announcer's. "Come one, come all. The Mirari awaits. Who is strong enough to take it from me?" Veza was poring over a scroll when Burke entered her chamber, The gel man wore a small circular hand mirror around his neck, and from it came Loquatus's voice. "Please follow my jack," Loquatus said. "There is something I want you to see." Burke kept pace as Veza swam through the ship. She noticed that his hands and feet became flatter and wider when he swam, and he stayed by her side easily no matter how fast she went. She stole as many glances at his expressionless face as she dared, searching in vain for some flicker of recognition, or at least independence. Verk was as inscrutable as a mask. Loquatus had taken to filling his command ship with air, both for his mercenaries and in case anyone tried to teleport in. A cephalid assassin would find himself floundering on the floor as soon as he arrived, and they would drown without so much as touching Loquatus. Veza and Burke stepped into the chamber, and Loquatus greeted Veza with a warm, loud call. "Hello, Director! I'm about to contact the former Empress to discuss terms of her surrender." Veza's eyes darted to the view screen, which showed the exact same standoff she had seen for the past week. Loquatus nodded. Burke gently nudged her forward, and Veza took a seat Loquatus offered her. "Get Lawan on the scrying screen," Loquatus said. He took out his own hand mirror, and Veza watched him whisper into it. She could see a thin man with braided black hair, but she did not recognize him, and could not hear his voice. Finally, Loquatus said, "Done. A pleasure doing business with you as always. And may I add, congratulations on your recent ascension." He paused while the other man spoke. "After today, you will be able to offer me similar sentiments." The mirror went dark, and he put it away with a smug little smile. "We have the Empress, my lord." "Excellent. Put her on, and have the troops in the chasm stand by." Lawan appeared in the screen with the mystic Ulsham, his eyes closed, and another cephalid officer at his side. "What do you want, Loquatus?" "Greetings, Empress. I hope you are well. Isn't it a fine day?" Veza's dread was like physical pain. She didn't know what Loquatus was up to, but she guessed he had been preparing it since he captured the survey vessel. She continued to stare at Ulsham, willing the mystic to hear her silent message of warning. "Speak, irritant, you waste our time." "This is something in the nature of an official call, I'm afraid, and I'm here to offer terms." "Then you will abandon this farce and submit yourself to imperial justice?" "Actually, Empress, I was going to offer you one last chance to surrender. You have already lost here. If you leave now and cede the chasm to me, I will spare you the embarrassment of losing each and every one of your loyal guards. I may even spare your life." Lawan chittered. "You are a fool, Loquatus. We mock you and spurn your offer." "Are you sure?" Loquatus's obvious joy twisted Veza's stomach, but Lawan was unimpressed. She began to turn away from the screen. "Inform the troops," Loquatus said loudly. "Launch an all-out attack on the Empress's forces. Begin immediately." Lawan paused and shook her head. "Your ego has finally grown past the point of your good sense," she said. "But the Imperial Guard will be happy to accommodate your lunacy." The occupants of both vessels heard the sounds of renewed combat. Lawan stared grimly at Loquatus, who stared, smiling at Lawan. Veza fought the urge to cry out to Ulsham. Whatever was about to happen, the Empress's ship would be better off if it were intangible, as her transport had been during the catastrophe that created the chasm. Ulsham opened his eyes. Veza was the only one on board who had seen the Empress's shield defenders in action. And so she was the only one who saw their almost transparent bodies stream up and encircle the Empress. They did not harden into their defensive formation, but they stood by, ready to do so. "Forgive me, Empress," said the yacht Cephalid's captain, "but I think you should see this." Lawan turned, and Loquatus's bridge had a clear and unobstructed view of Lawan, complete with the image that appeared on its scrying view screen. Both bridges stared silently at the images they saw. On Lawan's screen, a steady stream of dark, serpentine figures were pouring out of the chasm and surging forward to attack Lawan's troops. There were thousands of them, a multitude. Along with the ambassador's mercenaries and monsters, they slammed into the Empress's line like a crashing wave and slowly drove it back. When the Empress spoke, it was to her crew, her voice thick with anger.
What are we looking at?
I don't know, Empress. Those creatures seem to be coming from outside the chasm rather than inside of it. Lawan turned back to Loquatus.
They attack our loyal guards. What are they? What do they want?
Veza stared as the skirmish grew steadily bigger. Her memory had been jogged by the sight. She remembered a Cabal barge that docked in Breaker Bay some years ago. The Cabalists had set up a makeshift arena and staged a fighting demonstration. A wild-eyed woman with green eyes and a bald head challenged all comers, and she had beaten every one. Not her, Veza corrected herself. The monsters she created.
They are dementia creatures. Veza's voice was hushed, muted by fear.
Loquatus beamed.
Yes, confirmed the ambassador. And they are here to kill you, Lawan.